The air hung still, an unnatural quiet, settling over the opulent grand ballroom of the Grand Hyatt Singapore. Amidst the clinking of dozens of champagne glasses and the high-pitched laughter echoing across the marble floors, Sarah Tan was a solitary island. Before her lay a champagne glass almost untouched. She gazed indifferently at her fingertips, which caused tiny ripples on the surface of the liquid with their faint trembling. Why had she come to this place? Years ago, perhaps, but now the lingering sense of belonging to a school alumni had no meaning for her. Perhaps it was the persistent urging of an old friend she couldn't ignore, or perhaps a tiny dust-like trace of lingering hope remained in a corner of her heart. Was it a cowardly desire to revisit the person she was, who dreamt of ordinary happiness before everything crumbled? Her reverie was shattered by a sharp, high-pitched voice. "Oh, Sarah Tan, is that really you? What brings you here?" 1, 2. It was Michelle Lim, an individual who had always been unusually flamboyant and thrived on attention since their school days. Now she was the star of the reunion, adorned in that very flamboyance like a trophy. Michelle spoke loudly, clearly intending for Sarah to hear. "I heard your husband's business went bust. Rumor has it he disappeared without a trace. Such a shame." 3, 4 laughter mingled in her words, the cruel, characteristic laughter of those who use another's misfortune to confirm their own happiness, laced with mockery and contempt. Several classmates nearby chuckled in agreement with Michelle. Their gazes sharp as blades pierced Sarah's modest attire, a simple, elegant dress devoid of any visible luxury brand logos. 3, 4, minimal polite makeup, and above all a weary, expressionless face that seemed etched by the hardships of life. All of it served as prime gossip for Michelle and her clique. "So this is how she looks now, so plain. We were worried for nothing, thought she might not even be eating properly," another classmate added. Sarah did not respond. She merely focused on the cold sensation of the champagne glass in her hand. Fatigue washed over her more than anger. Their world and hers were already on different orbits. There was no need to expend energy trying to collide. Indifference. That was the most effective defense Sarah had learned for survival over the past few years. But Michelle took Sarah's silence as a sign of defeat, growing even more arrogant. She took another step closer, placing a hand adorned with jeweled rings on Sarah's table. The diamond glittered unpleasantly under the lights. "Don't worry, my husband will be here soon. You know the most successful man in the industry, the one who caused your husband's company to fail, Marcus Ong, managing director of Ascend Holdings. Who knows if my husband is in a good mood, he might even give your husband a junior position in our company. It'll hurt your pride, but at least you won't starve right 5, 6. The taunting reached its peak. Sarah's eyebrows twitched almost imperceptibly at the mention of the industry that caused your company to fail, but she still revealed no emotion. She simply raised the glass to her lips. The champagne tasted bitter, like the condensed essence of her past life. The surroundings were filled with envious whispers and flattering words directed at Michelle. In this deceptive world where a husband's success defined one's social standing, Michelle reigned like a queen. 3, 7, 8. Her slightest remark elicited eager agreement from her classmates, and the atmosphere shifted with her every gesture. Sarah simply wished for all this noise to pass quickly. It was precisely then. The heavy doors of the ballroom quietly opened. Michelle, who had been the center of all the noise, reacted first. Her face brightened, and she exclaimed triumphantly, "Oh, darling, you're finally here." All eyes turned to the door. Standing there was a man in a perfectly tailored, expensive suit. His hair was impeccably groomed. His expression exuded arrogant confidence. He scanned the ballroom briefly, then walked with stiff, elevated posture directly towards his wife's table without hesitation. Marcus Ong, the man Michelle had boasted about relentlessly, the very symbol of success. 5. Michelle rose from her chair, smiling broadly and waving. "Darling, over here!" This way her voice rang out like a victor's anthem. She intended to link arms with Marcus and flaunt her triumph to everyone present, especially to Sarah Tan, who sat in the corner. The surrounding classmates also greeted him with expectant looks. Marcus approached the table, responding to his wife's gesture. His gaze naturally swept over his wife and the people around her, a triumphant smile on his lips. But the moment his eyes caught sight of a woman sitting motionless in the corner beside his wife, everything stopped. His confident stride froze instantly. The arrogant smile vanished from his face, replaced by disbelief, horror, and a deathly pallor. His pupils shook violently, and his jaw trembled slightly. He fixed his gaze solely on that woman, as if his wife, Michelle Lim, wasn't even there. The ballroom's din miraculously subsided. Everyone's attention was drawn to Marcus Ong's frozen face, and where his gaze was directed, Sarah Tan. Michelle, unaware, tugged at her husband's arm. "Darling, what's wrong? Do you know her?" Marcus didn't even hear her. He barely managed to part his dry lips. His voice, barely a whisper, seemed to be pulled from the depths of his throat. "Madam CEO." 5, 6, one word. But that single word was enough to freeze the entire ballroom. The weight of the title Madam CEO shattered the boisterous laughter, the mocking whispers, and all the arrogant air into molecular fragments. The smile vanished from Michelle Lim's face. The expressions of the snickering classmates hardened. They began to realize what they had just done. This plain-looking woman, whose husband's failed business they had scorned and mocked, was the very person whom Marcus Ong, the most powerful figure among them, and a managing director at Ascend Holdings, addressed as Madam CEO. 5. Sarah Tan slowly placed her champagne glass onto the table. The small clink echoed like thunder in the frozen ballroom, and for the first time, she very slowly raised her head and looked directly at Marcus Ong. Her eyes held no emotion, only a deep, cold abyss that seemed to see through everything. In that instant, the classmates' laughter turned into screams, and their mocking circle transformed into a chilling execution ground. The curtain of hell had just risen, a stillness as if time had stopped. The words "Madam CEO" from Marcus Ong's lips sent an invisible shockwave through the entire ballroom. The air became cold and fragile like glass. People seemed to forget how to breathe, their gazes darting between Sarah Tan, Marcus Ong, and Michelle Lim caught between them. The most shocked, naturally, was Michelle Lim. Her face, which had held a triumphant smile, shifted to bewilderment, and now a deathly white terror. "Darling, what did you just say, Madam CEO?" "Which Madam CEO?" This woman, Sarah Tan." She couldn't finish her sentence. Tens of thousands of puzzle pieces tried frantically to fit together in her mind, but no picture formed. Plain-looking Sarah Tan, whose husband's business was supposedly ruined. How could she possibly be the Madam CEO to her husband, Marcus Ong? The successful managing director of Ascend Holdings. Marcus seemed not to hear his wife's voice. He was entirely captive to Sarah Tan's cold gaze. He felt cold sweat trickling down his spine. The events of a few days ago, when the entire company had been in an uproar, flashed through his mind. A new biotech startup, Biogenesis Innovations, had overnight become the owner of Ascend Holdings through a hostile takeover. The CEO of Biogenesis Innovations had been shrouded in secrecy. 5, 6. Later that evening, an emergency board meeting was convened, and the new CEO's identity was to be officially revealed to all employees. And the name of that new CEO was Sarah Tan. Marcus had spent days scrambling to uncover the new CEO's background and inclinations, but had found almost nothing, only that she was a legendary figure who had appeared like a comet in the industry, building her company into a giant in just a few years. And the rumor was that she was an exceptionally astute and charismatic woman. Yet that legendary figure, his new owner, who held the power of life and death over him, was now standing right before him. Sarah Tan, his former classmate whom his wife had subjected to all sorts of insults and mockery. Sarah Tan slowly rose from her seat. As she moved, everyone's eyes followed her like magnets. She tore her gaze from Marcus Ong and looked at Michelle Lim, who was frozen and deathly pale. A faint yet ice-cold smile touched Sarah's lips. "Michelle, your husband has just arrived. Aren't you going to introduce us?" Her voice was soft, but it held a power that sent chills down everyone's bones in the ballroom. It was a moment where the roles of the mocker and the mocked were perfectly reversed. Michelle's lips moved, but no words came out. She clutched her husband's arm as if pleading for salvation, but Marcus, terrified, pulled his arm away as if shaking her off. "Mr. Ong," Sarah called out this time to Marcus Ong. Her tone was utterly businesslike, devoid of any warmth. Marcus Ong's shoulders flinched and trembled. He instinctively bowed almost at a 90-degree angle. "Yes, Madam CEO. I had no idea you were here." 5, 6. His servile posture shocked the surrounding classmates. The man who had acted so arrogantly as if he owned the world just moments ago, trembling uncontrollably, it was a surreal sight. Michelle Lim's face turned ashen at the sight of her husband. She was witnessing with her own eyes the collapse of her pride, her entire world, her husband. Sarah nodded slightly. Of course you didn't. Otherwise you wouldn't have let your wife behave so rudely. I'm so sorry. Truly, I apologize. My wife, she didn't recognize you, Madam CEO, and made a grave mistake. Mistake? Sarah cut him off. Her eyes sharpened like blades. Mr. Ong, is it a fundamental principle of business to ascertain your counterpart's identity before deciding how to treat them? Was it Ascend Holdings' way to stomp on those who appear humble and prostrate yourselves before those who seem powerful? Is that why your company ended up a pathetic meal for another 5, 6? Each word pierced Marcus Ong's heart like a dagger. He couldn't raise his head. Pathetic meal for another company. These were the most humiliating words an executive could hear, and they stung even more because they were true. Sarah no longer paid attention to Marcus Ong. She slowly looked around at the stunned classmates. These were the faces that had just mocked and ridiculed her. Now their faces were filled only with awe, fear, and incomprehensible confusion. They were dimly beginning to realize who they had provoked and what the consequences might be. That was quite an entertaining show. Well, I must be going. Sarah picked up her handbag. She walked across the ballroom with an unhurried step as if nothing had happened. The path before her parted like the Red Sea. No one dared to block her way or speak to her. 3. Once the doors closed and she had completely disappeared, the frozen air in the ballroom finally burst forth. All eyes turned to Marcus Ong and Michelle Lim. It was not a gaze of sympathy or comfort. It was a look of curiosity, contempt, and the cruel certainty that their time was up. Michelle Lim's legs gave way, and she almost collapsed. Marcus Ong roughly pulled her up. There was no longer any affection for his wife in his eyes. Only hatred and fury burned directed at the person who had ruined his life. What on earth have you done? Marcus Ong gritted his teeth and snarled, completely disregarding the surrounding gazes. I didn't do anything. I didn't know that woman was someone like that. If you didn't know, you should have kept your mouth shut. Why did you open your big mouth and ruin everything? Because of you, my entire life is over. Michelle Lim, pale, simply sobbed as he yelled at her. The woman who had moments ago been the object of everyone's envy was now the most pathetic spectacle. Her former hangers-on discreetly began to distance themselves, trying to avoid any collateral damage. Sarah Tan walked slowly down the hotel corridor after exiting the ballroom. The distinct click of her heels echoed unusually loudly. Her face remained expressionless, but a cold fire burned in her chest. Vindicated. No, it wasn't such a fleeting emotion. This was merely the beginning. Tonight's events were just the prologue to a grand play of revenge that was yet to unfold. She pressed the elevator button for the car park. She gazed at her reflection in the smooth metal doors, a face that looked tired and numb. But deep within, hidden behind that facade, were the eyes of a predator sharpened over years, harboring the poison of vengeance. Michelle Lim, Marcus Ong, you touched something you shouldn't have today. Everything you took from me, all the humiliation and pain I endured, I will slowly and harshly return to you starting now. The elevator doors opened, and Sarah walked into the darkness without hesitation. The lavish lights of the ballroom were completely shut out behind her. Now it was her time. Monday morning at Ascend Holdings headquarters was filled with an unusual tension. The events of the alumni reunion over the weekend had spread like wildfire through the upper echelons of society. Rumors that managing director Marcus Ong and his wife had been publicly humiliated by the new CEO, who orchestrated the company's M&A, shook the entire company from the highest-ranking executives to the lowest-level employees. Staff gathered in hushed groups, whispering yet wary of being overheard by management. Marcus Ong had endured a hellish weekend. Returning from the reunion on Saturday night, he had lashed out at Michelle Lim, throwing objects indiscriminately. Michelle had only cried and apologized, but his rage did not subside. His hatred for his wife, who had become an obstacle to his success and ambition, and his fear of the unpredictable variable that was Sarah Tan paralyzed his reason. He spent the night sleepless writing and deleting his resignation countless times. But he couldn't back down now. He couldn't let the empire he had built over decades, doing all sorts of dirty work, crumble so futilely. He arrived at the office earlier than usual. He deliberately strode through the lobby with a stern expression, pretending nothing had happened. He felt the sharp gazes of the employees piercing his back, but he tried his best to ignore them. Entering his office, he splashed water on his face and composed himself. There was still a chance. Sarah Tan was also a CEO. She wouldn't dismiss a competent executive over personal grudges. He had to prove his worth to her, somehow appeal to her that it was his wife's mistake and beg for forgiveness. That was the best conclusion he could reach. At exactly 9 a.m., an urgent board meeting notice was issued to all executives from the CEO's secretarial office. The venue was the main conference room on the top floor. Marcus Ong tidied his suit and headed to the meeting room. Most of the executives were already seated inside, all with grim expressions, covertly glancing at each other. They too had heard the rumors. As Marcus Ong entered, the air in the conference room grew even heavier. Overt looks of pity or even schadenfreude were directed at him. A moment later, the conference room doors opened and Sarah Tan appeared. She was no longer in the modest dress from the reunion, but a sharp black business suit. Behind her followed a secretary, a new face, and a person who appeared to be the head of legal. With her entrance, all noise in the conference room ceased. She walked to the head of the table and, before sitting down, slowly surveyed the executives gathered in the room. Her gaze held no emotion, making it all the more intimidating. Marcus Ong felt her gaze on him linger colder than any other, and he unconsciously swallowed hard. "I am Sarah Tan, the new CEO of Ascend Holdings." It was a concise self-introduction. There was no applause, no welcoming remarks. Sarah had orchestrated such an atmosphere. She immediately got to the point. "I have not gathered you here today for a grand inaugural address. Over the past few weeks, I have reviewed Ascend Holdings' internal documents. Revenue, operating profit, financial structure, on the surface, they don't look bad. But when I delved deeper, I found a stench of decay." The executives' faces hardened. Sarah's voice was as cold as ice. Complacent management, inefficient organizational structures, and above all, the moral hazard of the executives. Effective today, Biogenesis Innovations declares it will commence a large-scale restructuring and management innovation of Ascend Holdings. The word restructuring sent a ripple of murmurs through the conference room. Sarah continued unfazed. "Firstly, effective today, a special audit will be conducted on all corporate card usage and expense claims at Ascend Holdings. The audit will be directly led by Biogenesis Innovations' internal audit team, and there will be no exceptions. If any instances of misappropriation of company funds for personal use are discovered, legal action will be pursued for embezzlement and breach of trust, regardless of rank or position." Marcus Ong's heart sank. Records of past indiscretions flashed through his mind, buying designer bags for his wife with the corporate card, lavish weekend golf entertainments, and all sorts of illicit expenditures. The other executives' faces turned equally pale. This was not a mere warning. It was an explicit declaration of war, like a knife at their throats. Sarah's gaze fixed directly on Marcus Ong. In particular, the Strategic Planning Department led by Managing Director Marcus Ong. "I understand it's a core department of Ascend Holdings. However, based on my review, it has also been the department with the most inefficient and wasteful budget execution over the past few years." Mr. Ong. "Yes, Madam CEO." Marcus Ong involuntarily stood up from his seat. What is the raison d'etre of the Strategic Planning Department? Isn't it to discover future growth engines for the company and create sustainable momentum? Yet in the past few years, has there been even a single new business venture successfully led by you, Mr. Ong? Your reports are flashy, but they're nothing but empty shells devoid of substance. But if the market conditions were not favorable and there were various unforeseen variables. I don't want to hear excuses. Sarah cut him off coldly. Effective today, all projects in the Strategic Planning Department are suspended. And I will give you a new assignment, Mr. Ong. All eyes were on him. What humiliating task would be assigned? A premonition that it would be a fate more cruel than outright dismissal hung in the air. One of our company's biggest headaches right now is a regional logistics warehouse that has been operating at a loss for years. It's a white elephant no one wants to take responsibility for. Mr. Ung, I want you to go there personally and turn it profitable within 3 months. If you succeed, I will acknowledge your capabilities and recall you to headquarters. But if you fail, Sarah paused, her gaze chillingly fixed on Marcus Ong. Then you will have to decide your own future, Mr. Ong. It was a de facto demotion and the most humiliating kind, publicly shaming him in front of everyone. For Marcus Ong, who prided himself as the core brain of Ascend Holdings, being tasked with a dusty old regional warehouse was tantamount to a death sentence. His face flushed crimson and he was speechless. He wanted to argue, but he had neither the justification nor the courage. Sarah didn't look at him again and concluded the meeting. That will be all. Please return to your respective duties. However, from today onwards, I advise you not to make any foolish attempts to deceive my eyes or ears. I know far more than you think. With those words, Sarah exited the conference room without a backward glance. The remaining executives remained seated for a long time. They realized the new CEO was not merely a change of ownership. This was a complete conquest, a blood-soaked prelude to mercilessly purging anyone who dared to resist. Marcus Ong covered his face with trembling hands. Revenge. This was clearly revenge. Sarah Tan's cruel revenge, using his wife's mistake at the alumni reunion as an excuse to utterly crush him and cast him into the abyss. He gritted his teeth. He couldn't crumble like this. He would somehow rise again and twist the neck of that cold woman. But contrary to his resolve behind his back, his colleagues were already treating him as irrelevant, calculating the future internal political landscape. In the ruthlessness of power, he was already becoming a figure of the past. Sarah Tan returned to her office and stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows. Below, the skyscrapers of Singapore stretched out like toys. Just a few years ago, she had been struggling in the darkest, lowest corners of this city. She had to subsist on instant noodles in a cramped HDB rental flat that barely saw sunlight, constantly hounded by creditors. 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. It was perhaps natural that the current view felt surreal to her. Fragmented memories of the past surfaced in her mind. Kelvin Ko, her ex-husband, for whom she had risked everything. He was a kind and capable man who ran a small biotech startup. Sarah had dedicated everything to help him. She mortgaged the flat in her name, took out loans, and poured what little inheritance her parents had left her into the company. They had a dream, a humble but fervent wish to succeed together and live happily. But that dream instantly turned into a nightmare. News broke that the new drug technology their company was developing had failed in its final clinical trial phase. Financial difficulties spiraled out of control, and investors turned their back. Crucially, news reported that Ascend Holdings, a rival company, had succeeded in commercializing a similar technology first. Kelvin's company couldn't withstand it and collapsed. Even in despair, Sarah had comforted her husband, urging him to rise again. But days later, what awaited her was an empty flat, a single divorce paper, and an unbearable mountain of debt left in her name. Kelvin Ko had absconded overseas with all the remaining company funds. He had never truly loved Sarah. He only needed her money and her dedication. Everything had been a deception. Sarah was driven to the brink. Creditors visited her home daily, causing havoc, and she eventually lost everything and was left homeless. In those moments when she contemplated death, what held her back was a sense of injustice and fury. It was a desperate desire for revenge, a hatred for Kelvin Ko, and for the world that had cast them into ruin, that forced her to rise again. She hardened her resolve. By day, she worked odd jobs at eateries, and by night she delved into biotechnology papers, her specialization. She obsessively investigated why her husband's company had failed. Then she discovered something strange, the possibility that the clinical data had been manipulated. And crucially, she uncovered signs that internal information had been leaked to a competitor, Ascend Holdings. Her suspicions solidified. Someone had intentionally orchestrated the company's downfall. From that moment on, her goal was clear: revenge. To achieve it, she needed power, money, and authority. She cut down on sleep, dedicating herself to research. She found new possibilities in her husband's failed technology and developed her own unique innovations. Then, she sought out small investors, not hesitating to kneel and explain her technology and vision. Moved by the desperation and conviction in her eyes, a few investors provided her with seed money. That's how Biogenesis Innovations was founded. Sarah worked like a madwoman. She slept only a few hours a day, pouring everything into research and management. There were many moments of failure and crisis, but she never broke. The poison she had gained from the depths of betrayal and despair had made her as hard as steel. Biogenesis Innovations technology was revolutionary and began to shift the industry landscape. The company grew exponentially, becoming a formidable giant in just a few years. And finally, the time came. When she heard that Ascend Holdings, struggling with financial difficulties, was up for sale, Sarah didn't hesitate. She resolved to swallow the very company that had taken everything from her. The hostile takeover was successful, and she finally became the owner of Ascend Holdings, the heart of her enemy, Kelvin Coe, and Marcus Ong. Sarah recalled Marcus Ong's file once more. While reviewing Ascend Holdings documents, she had discovered a shocking fact. Marcus Ong, then the head of new business development at Ascend Holdings, had played a pivotal role in the downfall of her ex-husband's company. He had deliberately approached Kelvin Coe, leaked internal information, and was one of the key figures who led the company to bankruptcy. It was highly probable that he had conspired with Kelvin Coe to sell the company for a pittance or had simply used and discarded him. Their encounter at the alumni reunion was a coincidence, but that coincidence had fueled Sarah's thirst for revenge. Marcus Ong was not merely the arrogant husband of a former classmate. He was one of the enemies who had utterly destroyed her life. And his wife, Michelle Lim, had reopened old wounds and inflicted new humiliation. Sarah's gaze grew cold. Sending Marcus Ong to the regional logistics warehouse was merely the beginning of her revenge. Firing him outright would be too bland. She intended to systematically shatter his pride and reputation, reduce everything he had built to ashes before his eyes, and then cast him out in the most pathetic state. As for Michelle Lim, who had leeched off her husband's success and reveled in the misfortune of others, Sarah would ensure she witnessed her entire illusion of success vanish, like a mirage. Michelle would endure the daily agony of watching everything she once boasted about disappear like dust. The glamorous cityscape outside her window now appeared to Sarah's eyes as a vast hunting ground. She was now the predator. The years of pain and tears had made her stronger and more ruthless. "It's just beginning," she murmured to herself, the low voice cutting through the silence. It contained no sorrow or joy, only an icy resolve. Having confronted her past head-on, a past she had long forgotten or desperately tried to forget, she was now ready without any hesitation to walk towards her bloody path of vengeance. News of Marcus Ong's demotion to the regional logistics warehouse spread like wildfire throughout Ascend Holdings. It was more than a mere personnel transfer. It was a symbolic event demonstrating how the new CEO, Sarah Tan, would wield her power. Employees held their breath in the face of the new ruler, and executives aligned with Marcus Ong were particularly on edge. Marcus Ong packed his belongings. The items from his opulent managing director's office were now shabbily contained in a few boxes. No one helped him. Subordinates who had once fawned over him now avoided him as if he were a plague. He painfully realized through his own plight how wretched a person stripped of power could become. "I can't end it like this," he muttered in the empty office. His body trembled with rage and humiliation. Sarah Tan. Her cold gaze haunted his mind. She had acted as if she knew everything. Did she know about Kelvin Coe's company? No, that couldn't be. It was a perfect crime. No evidence remained. This must simply be personal revenge spurred by the incident at the alumni reunion. He tried his best to calm himself. The road to the logistics warehouse was long and arduous. The glamorous cityscape of Singapore quickly faded, replaced by bleak industrial zones and desolate fields. The warehouse upon his arrival was even older and dirtier than he had imagined. Peeling paint on the building, rusted iron gates, and an inexplicable stench lingering around the premises. He felt dizzy at the thought that this would be his workplace for the foreseeable future. The warehouse staff greeted their newly appointed manager with resentful eyes. Rumors had already spread that the high-flying managing director from headquarters had been exiled here overnight. Their eyes held contempt and curiosity for a fallen man rather than respect. "Sir, you're here. The office is this way." The warehouse supervisor reluctantly showed him the way. What was called an office was a shabby space, barely partitioned with a dusty desk and a creaking chair. Marcus Ong was speechless. Being told to turn this place profitable in 3 months was practically a death wish. From day one, it was a continuous struggle. The warehouse system relied on manual ledgers and outdated computers from decades ago. Inventory management was chaotic, and the employees' work ethic was lackluster. Marcus Ong tried to shout orders and push the staff as he would have at headquarters, but no one paid him any heed. Instead, he heard only snickers behind his back. He realized that here he was, no longer Sir. Meanwhile, at Ascend Holdings headquarters, Sarah Tan's cold wind of change blew even more fiercely. The special audit she had announced was unimaginably thorough and relentless. The audit team dispatched from Biogenesis Innovations meticulously combed through all of Ascend Holdings' ledgers. They tracked not only executives' corporate card usage, but also their spouses' and children's overseas travel expenses. The results were devastating. Evidence emerged exposing not only Marcus Ong, but most of the executives for treating company money as their personal piggy bank. Executives had received hundreds of thousands in kickbacks, and some had even created slush funds through fictitious service contracts. It was a hotbed of corruption. Sarah didn't hesitate. Based on the audit findings, she dismissed all implicated executives. Some were even reported to the authorities. Within days, Ascend Holdings' board was decimated. The vacant positions were filled by young, capable talents from Biogenesis Innovations. The company culture completely shifted. Complacency and bureaucracy vanished, replaced by a fierce atmosphere focused on performance and merit. Marcus Ong heard all these developments from his regional warehouse. He was gripped by extreme fear as he watched his former colleagues who had once feasted on the company's riches alongside him being cut off one by one. His turn was surely next. The audit team's scrutiny would undoubtedly delve into his past actions. His dealings with Kelvin Co., the creation of slush funds, everything would soon be exposed. He grew anxious. He couldn't just sit there and take it. He stayed late at the warehouse, grappling with piles of documents. He had to somehow turn the logistics warehouse profitable to prove his competence to Sarah Tan. It was his only path to survival. He struggled to analyze the outdated system, identify inefficient shipping routes, and find solutions. He even mingled with the on-site workers, something he had never done in his life, listening to their grievances. His struggle discarding his pride for survival was pathetic. But Sarah Tan, as if mocking his efforts, was preparing another move. She had no intention of merely firing Marcus Ong. She was systematically executing a plan to completely end his social standing. On her desk lay a file detailing all of Marcus Ong's corruption, along with a report on the technical data stolen from Kelvin Co.'s company. Sarah flipped through the report, murmuring coldly, "Not yet, Marcus Ong. The fear you're feeling now is nothing compared to the despair I endured. The real hell begins now." She picked up the phone and called the head of legal. "Begin preparations to leak the information on Marcus Ong to the media. We'll release it in the most sensational and humiliating way possible." The cold net of revenge was slowly yet surely tightening around its struggling prey. As Marcus Ong was demoted and rumors of instability within her husband's company spread, Michelle Lim's world began to crumble rapidly. Her life had been a dazzling castle built upon the bedrock of her husband's success. But as cracks appeared in that foundation, the castle walls crumbled helplessly. The first to turn their backs were those she believed were her friends. The clique with whom she enjoyed daily brunches and gossiped in exclusive department store VIP lounges. As if on cue, they started avoiding Michelle's calls. When she posted in their group chats, no one replied, and she heard through others that new gatherings were being organized without her. One day, she tried to act nonchalant and visited her usual luxury boutiques, arrogantly believing that her unchanging wealth could quell any rumors of her husband's demotion. But she was not met with the deferential treatment she was accustomed to. The manager offered an awkward smile, claiming to be busy with other customers. And when she asked to see new arrivals, she was presented with outdated stock. It was a subtle yet undeniable slight. The decisive incident occurred at her usual private hair salon. She arrived for her appointment, but the staff member gave an embarrassed look, claiming there had been a booking error. Next to her, another former classmate who had once fawned over Michelle was receiving a VIP treatment from the salon owner. The classmate pretended surprise upon seeing Michelle, then scanned her up and down with a look of condescending pity. "Oh, Michelle, is that you? What a surprise. I heard your husband went to the countryside. You must be having a hard time. You look like you've lost weight. It wasn't comfort." It was a cruel message. You're no longer on our level. Feeling all eyes on her, Michelle's face burned with unbearable humiliation. She fled the salon without a word like a fugitive. Back home, she collapsed in her empty living room and wept hysterically. Only now did she realize that everything she had built was a bubble floating on her husband's job title and salary. As her husband's standing faltered, her world vanished like a mirage. She called Marcus Ong, weeping and complaining. "Darling, I'm so miserable. Everyone is ignoring me. When are you coming back? I can't live like this." But her husband's voice through the receiver was cold. "I'm in deep trouble right now. Do you know what I'm going through because of the mess you caused? Hang up if you're going to talk nonsense." Marcus Ong was also enduring hellish days. He had swallowed his pride and thrown himself into the warehouse work for survival, but the situation did not improve. Headquarters offered no support. Instead, they hindered him at every turn. He knew full well that Sarah Tan was systematically isolating him. His wife's complaints only ignited his irritable fury. Michelle was desperate. Even her trusted husband had turned a cold shoulder. She believed all this misfortune began because of Sarah Tan. Rage and resentment welled up. How dare she make me so miserable? A foolish and dangerous thought began to sprout in her mind. She decided she had to meet Sarah Tan directly and settle things. Whether she had to kneel and apologize or fight tooth and nail, she had to end this situation. A few days later, Michelle Lim appeared in the lobby of Ascend Holdings headquarters. Despite her efforts to dress expensively with designer clothes and bags, her face stained with anxiety and agitation could not hide her shabbiness. She shouted at the reception desk, demanding to see the CEO acting hysterically. Security personnel tried to restrain her, but she resisted like a madwoman. Hearing the commotion, Sarah Tan's secretary came down. The secretary scanned Michelle from head to toe with a cold expression. Michelle Lim, correct, Madam CEO, is currently in an external meeting. If you have any business, please tell me. No need. Tell Sarah Tan to come out. I have something to say to her directly. Madam CEO has stated there is no reason for her to meet with you, Miss Michelle Lim. If you continue to cause a disturbance, we will report you to the police for obstructing business operations. The secretary's resolute attitude momentarily stunned Michelle. But she couldn't retreat now. She suddenly knelt before the secretary. All the employees in the lobby turned their gaze to her. Please, please, just let me see her once. It's all my fault. I mean, Madam CEO, I've committed a grave sin against you. I'm begging you like this. Please just forgive my husband this once. Her appearance, crying and snotty, was pathetic and miserable. The woman who once reigned like a queen at their alumni reunion was nowhere to be seen. But the secretary's expression remained unmoved. Just then, the elevator doors opened and Sarah Tan emerged. The external meeting had been a lie. She had been observing all this from her office CCTV. She slowly walked towards Michelle Lim, who was kneeling. Michelle spotted Sarah and, as if waiting for this moment, tried to grab her leg. But Sarah coldly stepped back, avoiding her touch. "Stand up, Michelle Lim." Sarah's voice was as cold as ice. "This won't change anything. And I'm not the one you should be begging for forgiveness. Then who? Who should I beg? What can I do for you to forgive my husband?" Sarah looked down at the pale Michelle and said, "Do you even know what your husband Marcus Ong did? Do you think it was just a matter of using some company money? He utterly crushed another person's life and built his success upon it. And you adorned yourself with that dirty money and laughed at others." She leaned closer, whispering into Michelle's ear. It was a voice so low, only Michelle could hear, yet its content was like thunder. "My husband's business didn't just fail. Your husband made my husband's business fail. Do you understand now why I'm doing this?" Michelle Lim's eyes widened in horror. Her pupils shook frantically. She had never imagined her husband could commit such an act. Sarah turned away, leaving the frozen Michelle behind. "Security team, escort this woman out. Ensure she never sets foot in this building again." As security personnel dragged her out, Michelle muttered like a zombie, "No, it can't be." In the most horrifying way, she was realizing that her dazzling castle had actually been a sand castle built on someone else's blood and tears. His time at the regional logistics warehouse was a nightmare for Marcus Ong. He struggled relentlessly to improve performance, but the situation did not get better. Headquarters transferred all inefficient inventory to his warehouse, and key clients canceled their contracts. Sarah Tan's methods of strangling him were persistent and systematic. Then one morning, shocking news broke on TV. Former Ascend Holdings executives under investigation for corruption charges. Hundreds of millions in embezzlement and breach of trust uncovered. The Ascend Holdings headquarters building was shown on screen, and the news anchor reported the details of the corruption in an excited voice. A moment later, a photo of Marcus Ong himself appeared as part of the report. In particular, prosecutors are focusing on the charges against Managing Director Marcus Ong, who was demoted to a regional post. Mr. Ong is accused of illegally seizing core technology from a rival company during his time as head of new business development, leading to its bankruptcy. The remote control slipped from Marcus Ong's hand. His blood ran cold. What he had feared had finally come to pass. Sarah Tan was not merely firing him. She was systematically destroying his public life. He thought his dealings with Kelvin Co. were a perfect crime. How had she found the evidence? At that moment, the warehouse office door burst open and men in black suits stormed in. Mr. Marcus Ong, correct. You are under arrest for breach of trust and disclosure of trade secrets. A search and seizure warrant was unfolded before his eyes. He could not resist. He couldn't. His mind was blank. He felt the warehouse staff whom he had once ignored and scorned watching him with mixed looks of contempt and mockery as he was handcuffed. They were the very people he had dismissed just days ago. News of Marcus Ong's arrest also reached Michelle Lim. She collapsed upon receiving a call from her husband's lawyer. What Sarah Tan had told her days earlier was true. Her husband was not just a successful businessman. He was a criminal who had ruined others' lives. Everything she had enjoyed the lavish apartment designer, clothes and bags, the envious glances of others. All of it was the price of dirty crime. She felt an unbearable surge of nausea. She began frantically smashing objects in her apartment, breaking and tearing apart all the symbols of her vanity and greed. But even so, the guilt and self-loathing did not disappear. Days later, during his interrogation, Marcus Ong crumbled under the weight of the evidence presented by Sarah Tan. Through relentless investigation, she had secured not only the financial flows of secret accounts between Marcus Ong and Kelvin Co., but also CCTV footage of their clandestine meetings. Although Kelvin Co. had fled overseas, the traces he left behind were fully exposed by Sarah Tan's thirst for revenge. Cornered, Marcus Ong confessed everything. How he had approached Kelvin Co., what information he had stolen, and what he had promised in return. He even revealed that Kelvin Co. Sarah Tan's ex-husband had been deceiving her from the start, coveting her assets. Sarah Tan watched Marcus Ong break down through the one-way mirror in the interrogation room. The head of legal stood beside her. Madam CEO Marcus Ong is finished. All charges are proven. He won't be able to avoid a heavy sentence. I know, Sarah replied calmly. But her eyes flickered with complex emotions. A profound sense of emptiness washed over her rather than triumph. The goal of revenge that had sustained her life for years was now being realized before her eyes, yet her heart felt hollow. She decided to confront Marcus Ong directly. The interrogation room door opened, and as Sarah entered, Marcus Ong, handcuffed and looking disheveled, raised his head. His eyes held a mixture of hatred, fear, and a hint of desperation. Why? Why are you doing this only to me? Kelvin Co. is the main culprit. I just did what I was told. Your excuses are tiresome. Sarah cut him off coldly. She sat in the chair opposite him and looked him straight in the eye. Even if I hadn't appeared at that reunion, even if your wife hadn't insulted me, I would have found you eventually. Your name was on my revenge list from the very beginning. The only difference is that the order was slightly expedited by coincidence. Marcus Ong was speechless. This was no petty personal feud. It was a meticulous and cruel plan of revenge, conceived from the start. Just one question. Do you regret it? Sarah's question was met with a long silence from Marcus Ong. He finally managed to speak in a trembling voice. Regret. Of course, I regret it. I regret provoking a monster like you. There was no hint of remorse in his eyes, only resentment for the ruin brought by his own choices. Sarah smiled faintly. That was enough. She no longer felt he was worth speaking to. She stood up and before leaving the interrogation room, uttered one last remark. I hope you slowly reflect on the suffering of those you crushed within the confines of your prison cell. And give my regards to my wife, Michelle Lim. She's probably living in a hell even harsher than yours. With those words, Sarah exited the interrogation room without looking back. The door closed, leaving Marcus Ong alone to scream in despair. His glamorous life was now over, and his downfall was merely the prelude to another tragedy that had just begun. Besides Sarah Tan, always silently assisting her was Mr. Lee, her secretary who had been with Biogenesis Innovations since its early days. He was the only person who had witnessed Sarah's entire journey, from battling despair in her humble HDB rental flat to becoming the head of a huge corporation. Mr. Lee truly felt how much more ruthless and meticulous Sarah had become since her quest for revenge began. That night, returning from the alumni reunion, Sarah had instructed him to thoroughly investigate everything about Marcus Ong and Ascend Holdings. A cold fire, unlike anything he had seen before, burned in her eyes. Following Sarah's instructions, he uncovered internal corruption at Ascend Holdings and tracked Marcus Ong's past activities. In the process, he was shocked to discover that Marcus Ong had been deeply involved in the bankruptcy of Kelvin Ko's company, Sarah's ex-husband. This was not a mere unfortunate coincidence. Everything was intertwined, as if by fate. Mr. Lee reported all his findings to Sarah. He expected her to be angry or saddened, but Sarah's reaction exceeded his expectations. She showed no emotional fluctuation and with an ice-cold voice began to lay out her revenge plan. It was a perfect scenario: publicly destroy Marcus Ong, cast Michelle Lim into the depths of despair, and purge all corrupt Ascend Holdings executives. There were times when even Mr. Lee was chilled by her ruthlessness. She manipulated their destinies as if moving chess pieces. But he couldn't blame Sarah. He knew better than anyone what pain she had endured in the past, how utterly she had been broken. Her current ruthlessness was like armor she had to wear to survive. With Marcus Ong's arrest and the successful restructuring of Ascend Holdings, the company rapidly stabilized. Employees, though terrified, were also relieved that the corrupt factions that had been eating away at the company were gone. Sarah Tan's leadership, though stern, was rational and fair. She boldly promoted capable employees and mercilessly eliminated unnecessary practices. One evening, late at night, Mr. Lee quietly entered Sarah's office. He placed a warm cup of tea on her desk. "Madam CEO, please take a short break." Sarah lifted her eyes from the documents and looked at him. Deep fatigue was etched on her face. "Thank you, Mr. Lee. The Marcus Ong matter is almost concluded. The media is also positively evaluating your management innovations, Madam CEO." "Are they?" Sarah's reply was flat. She gazed out at the night view. Countless city lights sparkled like stars, but to her eyes, they were just empty dots. "Mr. Lee, do you think I'm too cruel, Mr.?" Lee was speechless at the unexpected question. He carefully began to speak. "I believe every decision you make, Madam CEO, is just. You have every right to do so." "Right?" Sarah gave a bitter laugh. "Sometimes I feel like I'm turning into a monster who feels no guilt in ruining other people's lives for revenge." Madam CEO Mr. Lee looked at her with concern. "The monsters are elsewhere. Those who mercilessly crush others and pursue their own gains without conscience, they are the true monsters. You are merely making those monsters pay their dues." Sarah said nothing in response to his words. She turned her gaze back to the window. Will this profound emptiness disappear once revenge is complete? A faint hope that while she couldn't undo everything, she might at least be able to escape the nightmares of the past and start a new life was the only reason she endured. A few days later, Mr. Lee submitted another report to Sarah. It was a report on the recent whereabouts of Marcus Ong's wife, Michelle Lim. According to the report, after her husband's arrest, Michelle Lim was evicted from her luxurious apartment and moved to a small rented room in the outskirts of Singapore. All her assets were frozen, deemed proceeds of her husband's crimes, and everything in her name was under provisional attachment. The friends who had once fawned over her had all cut ties, and she was completely isolated. The report also stated that she had started working odd jobs at a restaurant to make a living, but quit after a few days, unable to endure the pointing fingers and whispers of customers. Sarah silently read through the report. The downfall of the woman who had once mocked her as shabby. She tried her best not to feel any emotion, neither pity nor empathy, not even a sense of triumph. She merely confirmed that everything was proceeding according to plan. "Keep an eye on her," she said softly. "Make sure she doesn't make any extreme choices. Death would be too easy an escape." Sarah wanted Michelle Lim to live and feel the full weight of the consequences of her actions. That to Sarah was the cruelest punishment. Mr. Lee silently bowed his head. Understood, Madam CEO. He sighed deeply as he left the office. Sarah Tan's saga of revenge was not yet over, and he could only silently watch where its end would lead. His boss, it seemed, had already crossed the point of no return. With the revenge against Marcus Ong concluded, Sarah Tan turned her attention to the other key figure who had driven her past to ruin her ex-husband Kelvin Ko. He had vanished years ago after embezzling company funds and fleeing overseas. The police had closed the case, unable to locate him, but Sarah was certain he was living a life of luxury somewhere in the world with the money he had stolen. She mobilized Biogenesis Innovations' immense financial and intelligence resources to track Kelvin Ko's whereabouts. She hired top private investigators and through overseas branches scoured immigration records and financial transaction histories from various countries. It was like searching for a needle in a haystack, but Sarah refused to give up. After months of persistent tracking, a small lead finally emerged. Kelvin Ko's activity funds were detected in a resort town in Southeast Asia. He was living in seclusion, having changed his name and appearance. Sarah's eyes glinted coldly upon receiving the information. She immediately dispatched a team to the location. Instead of simply apprehending Kelvin Ko, she instructed them to monitor his every move and thoroughly assess his current situation. A few days later, a detailed report arrived from the field. Kelvin Ko was living a comfortable life, managing a small resort with the money he had stolen from Sarah. He had started a new family with a local woman and appeared to be living a peaceful and comfortable life. However, the last part of the report contained information that piqued Sarah's interest. Kelvin Ko's resort was currently suffering from severe financial difficulties, and he had accumulated massive debts due to illegal gambling. A cold sneer spread across Sarah's lips. Humans indeed rarely change. She devised a plan for the most painful revenge against Kelvin Ko, to strip him of what he held most dear now, to take away everything he was desperately trying to cling to. Sarah decided to go there herself. Mr. Lee expressed concerns about her safety and tried to dissuade her, but Sarah's resolve was firm. She wanted to personally put an end to this bitter entanglement. A few days later, Sarah Tan arrived unnoticed at the small Southeast Asian resort. She disguised herself as an ordinary tourist and checked into the resort Kelvin Ko managed. The enemy she would face after years. Her heart surprisingly was calm. The resort appeared luxurious on the surface, but signs of financial distress were evident everywhere. Sarah sat far from the lobby, observing Kelvin Ko, who was obsequiously bowing to guests, flattering them. His past confident and dignified demeanor was gone. Years and greed had etched deep wrinkles and a vulgar expression onto his face. As evening fell, Sarah headed to the resort's bar. She deliberately chose a seat where Kelvin Ko would easily notice her. A moment later, as Kelvin Ko scouted for new wealthy guests, his eyes landed on Sarah. At first, he didn't recognize her. But the moment Sarah slowly raised her head and met his gaze, Kelvin Ko's face turned deathly pale with terror. Saw Sarah Tan. He recoiled as if he had seen a ghost. The face that had appeared only in his nightmares for years, the ghost of a past he thought was dead, had now materialized before him. Sarah smiled elegantly and beckoned with her hand. "Long time no see, darling. You look surprised to see me." At the word darling, Kelvin Ko's body stiffened. He looked around nervously, unable to hide his panic. How did you get here? I came looking for you." "Because I missed you. We still have some unfinished business, don't we?" Sarah's voice was sweet as honey, but it held a venomous sting. She pulled a few documents from her handbag and placed them on the table. "Do you know what these are? They're your debt statements. From Casino's loan sharks, quite a substantial amount. And this is the ownership deed for this resort." Kelvin Ko's eyes darted to the documents. Sarah Tan's name was clearly written as the owner on the resort's deed. What is this? How did this happen? It's simple. I bought all your debts, and this resort, which was held as collateral, is now mine. From now on, I am your new owner, Kelvin Ko. Kelvin Ko collapsed onto the floor. He realized he had fallen into a huge trap from which he could not escape. Sarah Tan had not just come for revenge. She had come to take everything from him, to hold his very life in her hands. Why? Why now? Well, I was just curious to see how happy you were living off my money, and I wanted to smash everything you've built right before your eyes, just as you did to me. Sarah stood up and walked towards him. She bent down and whispered coldly into his ear, her voice barely audible but carrying immense power. Starting tomorrow, you'll be assigned the menial tasks at this resort. You'll start with cleaning the toilet. You will work like a dog here, paying for your sins until I'm satisfied. Don't even think about escaping. This island is in the palm of my hand. She looked at Kelvin Coe's despairing face one last time, then walked away without a backward glance. It was the moment the final puzzle piece of her revenge clicked into place. But her heart was still filled with an unfillable emptiness. The thought suddenly crossed her mind that true revenge might perhaps be about rebuilding her own shattered life after all this was over. With Marcus Ong's arrest and her ex-husband's criminal activities exposed to the world, Michelle Lim's life spiraled into ruin. She lost everything: her home, money, reputation, and even her friends. The world turned its back on her, and she was utterly alone. At first, she denied reality, wanting to believe it was all a nightmare concocted by Sarah Tan, that her husband would soon be acquitted and everything would return to normal. But the daily news reports and people's scornful glances dragged her back to the brutal reality. She hid in a shabby rented room on the outskirts of Singapore. During the day, she kept the curtains drawn and didn't go out. Only at night, her face hidden by a cap and mask, would she grab a meal from a convenience store. For someone who once reveled in attention, the eyes of others had now become her greatest fear. One day, she saw Sarah Tan's interview on the TV news. Sarah Tan was introduced as a successful young female executive who had revolutionized Ascend Holdings. Her confident and dignified demeanor, logical and articulate speech, and sparkling eyes. She possessed everything Michelle had once dreamt of but could never have. Michelle watched Sarah on the screen, feeling a surge of jealousy and hatred. And at the same time, seeing her own shabby, broken reflection in the mirror, she fell into unbearable self-loathing. Why does this only happen to me? It's all Marcus Ong's and Sarah Tan's fault. I did nothing wrong. She blamed her misfortune on others, defending herself. But deep down, she knew. She too was a perpetrator. She couldn't deny her past self, who had reveled in her husband's dirty money, looked down on and mocked those weaker than her. As time passed, financial hardship tightened its grip. Eventually, she had to find a job again. But the label Marcus Ong's wife followed her like a shadow. She was repeatedly rejected at interviews, and the serving job she finally managed to get at a restaurant lasted only a few days, as customers recognized her and whispered. At the end of her despair, she remembered one last person: Sarah Tan. The only person who could end all this. She was gripped by pure curiosity, not revenge or resentment. What kind of person is Sarah Tan to have overcome all that and risen to that position? And why did I have to fall so completely? Michelle used her last remaining money to buy a simple outfit and headed to Ascend Holdings headquarters with a plan. She had no intention of causing a scene like last time. She just wanted to see from afar the world Sarah Tan now inhabited. She sat in a cafe across the street, gazing at the Ascend Holdings building all day. The bustling employees coming and going, the vibrant atmosphere. Everything was the world she had lost. As evening fell, the stream of employees leaving work began. And finally, a black sedan pulled up to the building's lobby, and Sarah Tan emerged. Michelle instinctively rose from her seat, and as if possessed, she crossed the street and approached Sarah. Bodyguards moved to stop her, but Sarah waved them away. She had already noticed Michelle sitting in the cafe. The two women looked at each other in silence for a long time. They had once been classmates in the same classroom, but now they stood in vastly different worlds. Michelle was the first to break the silence. "I just came to apologize." Her voice trembled faintly. "What I said at the reunion, all my rude behavior towards you. I sincerely apologize. I'm truly sorry." Sarah looked at her surprised. She had expected revenge or bitter reproaches. "What's the point of an apology now?" "I know it's pointless. I just want to feel at peace. And I have one question." Michelle gathered her courage and looked directly into Sarah's eyes. "How did you overcome all of it? How did you become so strong?" Sarah saw her past self in Michelle's empty eyes, the image of someone who had lost everything and was at the brink of despair. A tiny flicker of empathy arose in her heart. "I didn't become strong. I just had to survive. If I crumbled, everything would be over." I didn't have time to sit around blaming others like you. Those words pierced Michelle's heart like a dagger. Didn't have time to sit around blaming others, it accurately described herself. You still have a chance, Michelle Lim. The one who ruined my life wasn't Marcus Ong or me. It was you. If you realize that you can still start over from now, by your own strength, without relying on anyone. Sarah said these words, then got into her car. The car drove away, leaving Michelle alone on the street. Sarah's last words were neither forgiveness nor comfort for her. Yet strangely, she felt a heavy stone lift from her heart. For the first time, she confronted her past head-on, her foolishness, her vanity, and the brutal downfall that came with them. Tears flowed, but they were no longer tears of despair. They were tears of resolve, acknowledging everything and vowing to start anew from rock bottom. From that day on, Michelle Lim disappeared. No one knew where she went or what she was doing. She had shed her past self and set out to forge a new life entirely on her own. Sarah Tan's revenge unintentionally, instead of destroying a human being, had given her a chance for a new beginning. Ascend Holdings was completely transformed under Sarah Tan's leadership. The positions vacated by corrupt executives were filled with young talents, brimming with ability and passion. The past vertical and rigid organizational culture disappeared, replaced by a horizontal culture that valued free communication and creative ideas. Sarah did not merely stop at eradicating past malpractices. She spearheaded an audacious project to integrate Biogenesis Innovations' groundbreaking biotech technology with Ascend Holdings' existing distribution network and infrastructure. It was a monumental challenge, unprecedented in the industry. At the heart of the project was Jensen Lee, a young manager who had been promoted to the new head of strategic planning after Marcus Ong's downfall. He possessed exceptional abilities but had been overlooked under Marcus Ong, burdened with menial tasks and never properly evaluated. Sarah Tan recognized his potential at a glance and boldly entrusted him with the crucial role. Jensen Lee and his team worked tirelessly, day and night on the project. Sarah was not just a delegator. She actively participated in working meetings, offered ideas, and personally went out to solve problems. Her passion and vision became a powerful motivator for the employees. Months later, Ascend Holdings launched a new biotech cosmetic brand. This brand, a fusion of Biogenesis Innovations' unparalleled technology and Ascend Holdings' marketing expertise, generated an explosive response in the market upon its release. Revenue soared exponentially, and Ascend Holdings' stock price hit new highs daily. The company's success further elevated Sarah Tan's personal reputation. The media hailed her as an icon of innovation, a Midas touch, and eagerly reported her success story. She was no longer merely a woman driven by revenge. She was a true leader, recognized by the world for her competence and vision. One day, Jensen Lee, his face alight with excitement, sought out Sarah's office. "Madam CEO, we did it. We exceeded our quarterly sales target by 200%. It's a new industry record." Sarah took the report, a satisfied smile gracing her lips. "Excellent work, Mr. Lee. Everyone put in a tremendous effort. Tonight, dinner is on me." That evening, a modest celebration party was held at a local Singaporean eatery near the company. Young employees laughed and chatted freely, reveling in the joy of their success. Sarah looked on, pleased at her employees. What had started as a quest for revenge now held greater meaning. Saving the company and helping her employees realize their dreams. That was becoming her new goal. As the party wound down, Jensen Lee approached Sarah and quietly offered her a drink. "Madam CEO, thank you so much. If it weren't for you, I'd still be sifting through dusty documents in some dark warehouse. Thank you for giving me this opportunity." Sarah accepted the glass, moved by his sincere words. "I didn't give you the opportunity, Mr. Lee. You seized it yourself. I merely recognized your abilities." Their glasses clinked with a clear sound. Sarah emptied her glass, lost in thought. If not for the misfortunes of the past, she wouldn't be who she was today. Betrayal and despair had taken much from her, but they had also made her stronger and more resilient. On the car ride home after the party, Mr. Lee cautiously spoke. "Madam CEO, you looked truly joyful today." "Did I?" "Yes. You seemed genuinely happy. It's the first time I've seen you like that since I've been with you." Sarah gazed silently out the window. Mr. Lee was right. The sense of fulfillment and joy she felt today laughing with her employees was something she hadn't experienced, even when her revenge was complete. Perhaps this was true victory. Mr. Lee, please contact the team in Southeast Asia. Tell them to release Kelvin Ko now. Yes. But Mr. Lee couldn't hide his surprise. The greatest punishment for him is already the fact that he has lost everything. There's no longer a need to tie him to my life. Her voice was remarkably calm. Within her heart, once filled with hatred and a thirst for revenge, a tiny seed of forgiveness was sprouting. It wasn't forgiveness for Kelvin Ko. It was forgiveness for herself for being shackled by past wounds and bitter ties. The car stopped in front of Sarah Tan's home. She stepped out and looked up at the night sky. Countless stars twinkled. The starlight, which once seemed only empty, felt unusually warm and beautiful tonight. Having passed through a long tunnel of darkness, she finally stood before the door to a new world. Sarah Tan's success became a hot topic among her former classmates. Those who had once mocked her as shabby, whose husband's business had failed, now followed her news daily on TV and in newspapers, grappling with complex emotions. In particular, some classmates who had sided with Michelle Lim and laughed at Sarah at the reunion were living anxiously. They had heard through rumors how thorough and terrifying Sarah Tan's revenge on Marcus Ong and Michelle Lim had been. They worried that the sword of vengeance might turn on them. One of them ran a small medical supplies company. She had previously enjoyed a lucrative contract supplying uniforms to Ascend Holdings, leveraging her friendship with Michelle Lim. However, with Marcus Ong's downfall and the change of ownership at Ascend Holdings, the supply contract was severed overnight. The new management had reevaluated all contracts previously awarded through favoritism, and her company lost out in competitive bidding. With its main source of income cut off, the company rapidly spiraled into difficulties and eventually faced bankruptcy. Another classmate's husband was a stock analyst. He had made a fortune trading stocks using insider information obtained from Marcus Ong. But as Sarah Tan unearthed the corruption at Ascend Holdings, his husband also came under investigation by financial authorities for stock manipulation and insider trading. Ultimately, he was fired from his job and faced legal penalties and fines. They blamed Sarah's direct revenge for their misfortunes, harboring resentment towards her. However, Sarah in fact had no interest in them. Their downfall was merely a collateral consequence of Sarah's pursuit of justice. They had clung to Marcus Ong, a rotten rope to gain illicit profits, and when that rope snapped, they simply fell into the abyss with him. One day, the classmate who owned the medical supplies company, now facing bankruptcy, bravely contacted Sarah. She managed to secure an appointment through Sarah's secretary and visited Sarah's office. The arrogant demeanor she had at the alumni reunion years ago was gone, replaced by a timid and shabby appearance. As soon as she stood before Sarah, she knelt and tearfully pleaded. "Sarah, no, Madam CEO Tan. I have committed a grave sin. I sincerely apologize for my childish behavior at the reunion. Please just forgive me this once. My company is about to go bankrupt. Please." Sarah looked down at her with a cold expression. "Stand up. This is not a stage for such theatrics." The classmate reluctantly rose. Sarah sat in her chair, gazing at her coolly. "Why should I help your company? Shouldn't you be apologizing to the other competitors you unfairly pushed out instead of to me? Nothing in this world is free. You made easy money through your connection with Michelle Lim. But when that connection was severed, losing everything simply proves that your business relied on connections, not competence. Don't blame that on me." Sarah's words were harsh, but every one of them was true. The classmate, unable to refute, bowed her head. "Go home, and don't ever come back. I am not a charity worker. Your life is your own responsibility." Ultimately, the classmate gained nothing and was virtually chased out of the office. Only then did she realize Sarah Tan didn't even deem small fry like her worthy of revenge. That fact made her feel even more miserable. After this incident, other classmates also abandoned their foolish attempts to approach Sarah. They now shuddered at the mere mention of Sarah Tan's name. To them, Sarah was no longer the shabby classmate from the past. She was a formidable and terrifying entity who could control their fates. they were finally belatedly realizing. True strength came not from a flashy exterior or by leeching off power, but from an inner fortitude that refused to yield to any hardship rising by one's own efforts. And through the mirror that was Sarah Tan, they were painfully confronting how foolish and weak they truly were. As Sarah Tan's path to success reached its zenith, an unexpected crisis emerged. Marcus Ong, incarcerated, leaked false information to the media through an anonymous tipster. The content was a malicious accusation that Biogenesis Innovations' core biotechnology, which Sarah Tan led, was actually stolen from Kelvin Ko's former company, and that she had seized the company through unethical means. Marcus Ong, in a desperate last stand, attempted to tarnish Sarah's greatest pride in the foundation of her success, her technological prowess, and integrity. From prison, he manipulated former colleagues and fabricated documents, feeding them to the press. The news spread rapidly. Sensational headlines like "The Ugly Truth Behind the Successful Female CEO" were enough to ignite public curiosity. Competitors seized the opportunity to amplify the accusations, and the stock prices of Ascend Holdings and Biogenesis Innovations began to plummet. The company faced its biggest crisis since its founding. An emergency board meeting was convened. Executives, trembling with anxiety, debated countermeasures. Some argued that CEO Sarah Tan should step down from management temporarily to address the allegations before returning, as public opinion had severely deteriorated. But Sarah was unyielding. She spoke with a calm and firm voice. "This is merely Marcus Ong's despicable act of revenge. We must confront it head-on. The truth will eventually come to light." She immediately called for a press conference. Standing before numerous cameras and reporters, she appeared utterly undaunted, not showing the slightest sign of intimidation. She began by systematically refuting all the allegations made by Marcus Ong. She publicly disclosed all research data and patent documents, proving that Biogenesis Innovations technology was independently developed based on completely new principles building upon Kelvin Ko's failed technology. Then she made a bombshell announcement no one expected. "Today, I wish to speak frankly about my entire past." The press conference room fell silent for a moment. Sarah began to calmly recount her past, how she was betrayed by her ex-husband Kelvin Ko, what malicious acts Marcus Ong committed during that process, and how she had to rise again from the depths of utter despair. Her story was like a drama. She also did not hide her process of seeking revenge. "Yes, I sought revenge against Marcus Ong. Within the bounds of the law, I brought him down in the exact same way he had done to me. If this is something to be condemned, then I will fully bear that condemnation. However, I do not regret my choices." Her honest and dignified confession completely reversed the atmosphere of the press conference. Reporters who had initially eyed her with suspicion were now deeply engrossed in her story. They were moved by her desperate tale of survival and her exhilarating revenge against an unjust world. "Finally," Sarah stated, "the ones who stole technology were not me, but Marcus Ong and Kelvin Ko. They stole other people's dreams and lives. I merely fought to reclaim my own life. I leave the judgment to you and the public." The press conference became a nationwide sensation. Public opinion completely shifted in Sarah Tan's favor. She was no longer seen as an unethical executive, but was reevaluated as a hero who fought against injustice. People were enthusiastic about her courage and honesty. The plummeting stock prices soared to even higher levels than before within days. The crisis had paradoxically become an opportunity. Sarah Tan's leadership was further solidified, and the company's image was elevated to a new level. Marcus Ong's last desperate attempt ultimately resulted in digging his own grave. He was additionally indicted for defamation and perjury, and his prison sentence was clearly set to increase. After all, the commotion subsided, Sarah gazed out the window of her office. Through this crisis, she had learned something important, that there was no stronger weapon than the truth, and that she no longer needed to hide the wounds of her past. Those scars, too, were part of what made her who she was today. She felt as though she could finally lay down the heavy burden of revenge. She was ready to move forward, freed from the shadows of the past, fully empowered by her own strength and abilities towards the future. After all, the storms had passed, peace settled over Sarah Tan's world. Marcus Ong in prison with an extended sentence was forgotten by the world. The consequences of his wicked deeds were severe. The honor and wealth he had so desperately tried to protect vanished like dust, leaving only the stigma of a shameless criminal attached to his name. Michelle Lim disappeared without a trace. Rumors occasionally surfaced that she had changed her name and was living quietly in a small town in Singapore. She had abandoned her flamboyant past, choosing the life of an ordinary citizen. Whether she was forging a new life through her own efforts or still suffering in the specters of the past, no one knew. But one thing was clear, she too was paying the price for her actions. Kelvin Ko, released from the resort in Southeast Asia, had lost everything. Sarah had settled all his debts but reclaimed the resort and all his remaining assets. He was once again penniless, wandering a foreign land. His life, marked by betrayal and greed, was quietly drawing to a close, leaving nothing behind. Sarah Tan watched the downfall of all the individuals who had tormented her. But no triumph or hatred remained in her heart, only the calm reflection that everything had fallen into place. Their downfall was partly due to Sarah's revenge, but fundamentally it was the consequence of their own making. It was simply the natural law of the world coming to fruition. What goes around comes around. Ascend Holdings and Biogenesis Innovations thrived under Sarah Tan's leadership. She was no longer shackled by past revenge, pouring all her passion into building the company's future and creating new visions. She became a respected executive who valued her employees and fulfilled her social responsibilities. On a clear autumn day, Sarah visited her alma mater after a long time. It wasn't the luxurious hotel where the alumni reunion was held, but the old campus steeped in fresh memories. She sat on a quiet bench, gazing at the setting sun. The past few years flashed before her eyes like a revolving lantern. The time she had endured, surviving on nothing but a thirst for revenge from the depths of hell. The countless people she had met, fought, been hurt by, and grown with. It was because of all these experiences that she existed as she was today. Suddenly she wondered, what was true revenge? Destroying her enemies? No, that alone left an unfillable emptiness. The answer she found lay elsewhere. True revenge was living her own life, which they had tried to ruin more wonderfully and splendidly than anyone else. It was not about watching them fall into the abyss and laughing, but about finding her own happiness irrespective of them. That was the most perfect and exhilarating revenge. And she had now completed that revenge. In the distance, young students laughed and chatted walking past. Their faces, like her own in the past, held countless dreams and hopes. Sarah smiled faintly as she watched them. She no longer lived in the shadows of the past. A brilliant future lay before her. Having finished her long journey of revenge, she was finally ready to begin her life as her complete self. Years passed. Sarah Tan rose to become Singapore's most successful and respected female entrepreneur. The company she led expanded its business beyond the biotech industry into various sectors, growing into a global enterprise. She was no longer the cold woman consumed by revenge. Time had healed, the deep wounds in her heart replaced by an understanding and compassion for others, and a warm passion to make the world a better place. She also took the lead in giving back to society through her success. She donated a significant portion of her personal wealth to establish a scholarship foundation and dedicated much of her time to supporting young entrepreneurs with innovative ideas but lacking capital. One day she was volunteering at a children's home in a regional town. Her appearance, laughing and painting with the children, was no different from any other volunteer. It was during a short break as she handed out snacks to the children. In a corner, a familiar face caught her eye. A woman in humble work clothes quietly performing menial tasks. At first, Sarah wasn't sure, but she soon recognized her. It was Michelle Lim. Years had taken their toll on her face. The glamorous appearance of her past was gone, but surprisingly, her expression seemed more peaceful than ever before. Michelle too saw Sarah and was momentarily startled, but then calmly bowed her head in greeting. Sarah quietly approached her. An awkward silence hung between them. Michelle was the first to speak. "Long time no see, Sarah Tan. Or should I say Madam CEO Tan? Just call me Sarah." "I never thought we'd meet here," Michelle said with a bitter smile. "Me neither. What brings you here?" Michelle asked softly. "After losing everything, I finally saw what I truly needed to do. I wanted to live my real life, not a life for others to see. I've been taking care of the children here for quite some time. I don't earn much, but my heart feels at peace." There was no pretense or excuse in her words. She truly seemed to be finding her own path in life. The two women worked together in silence for a long time. They had once been entangled in a bitter rivalry, but now no resentment or hatred remained between them. They were simply classmates who had lived through an era, each carrying the weight of their own lives quietly moving forward. As the sun set and the volunteering ended, Sarah approached Michelle before leaving and handed her a small envelope. "What is this?" "Just a small gesture. Please use it for the children." Inside the envelope was a substantial check. Michelle tried to return the envelope, but Sarah waved her hand, refusing. "This isn't pity, nor is it an apology for the past. It's simply my way of supporting you as you begin a new life. Live well, Michelle Lim." With those words, Sarah got into her car. Michelle watched the car drive away for a long time. Quiet tears streamed down her face. They were not tears of regret or misery. They were hot tears of someone who had let go of everything and was finally able to reconcile with her past. In the car, Sarah gazed out the window, lost in deep thought. Perhaps her long journey of revenge had existed for this very moment. Beyond destroying her enemies, it was about every wounded soul finding salvation in their own place and starting a new life. A gentle smile blossomed on her lips. In her life, the word revenge was no longer needed. It was time to fill her days with new words, love, forgiveness, and hope. A long winter had ended, and a warm spring was finally arriving in her life.